people ask questions while I'm talking also?
Yes, if it's okay with you, we can
Fine with me. I like it. I don't know if I want to, and also maybe tell me when I reach 45 minutes. I mean, I don't know how much material I have. We'll see. Is that okay?
I'll give you a little alert.
Yeah. Sometimes I
yes,
can't see the little clock on my computer or I just lose
so
track.
we'll do that. And so therefore, feel free to raise your hand in the middle of the presentation, and I'll find a spot to call on you. So with that, and with the hope that you'll come to many more of our programs, I'm turning it over to David Beal, only because he happens to be sitting next to me. And he has been a colleague of Naomi Seidman's in the field of Jewish studies for many, many, many years. So he's going to introduce her.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, Naomi, for joining us. I'm actually the president of the board of New Lair House, so you can see this is a bit of a family business. Matchmaking turns out to have been very important in bringing this program to you. So what I want to say about Naomi, and I hope I don't make her ears burn, she is the most original scholar in Jewish studies today, in my opinion. And everything she does is so fresh and original that it's just worth reading everything and listening to her lectures. And I've been doing that for many years and I never get tired of it. Two books relevant to our talk tonight. One slightly less relevant than the other. Naomi's first book, A Match Made in Heaven, the sexual politics of Hebrew and Yiddish. And then a more recent book, which really is on our topic, is called The Marriage Plot, How Jews Fell in Love with Love and Literature.
You mentioned the podcast.
Oh, yes, thank you. And I urge all of you to, wherever you get your podcasts, look for A Heretic in the House. It's Naomi's podcast about leaving the ultra-Orthodox world. And it's not what you expect. So it's really, it's a very professional podcast, actually, very well done. And it turns out Naomi has, in addition to all of her other great qualities, an amazing radio voice. So anyway, my great pleasure to welcome my dear friend and colleague, Naomi Seidman.
So just one quick comment before that about this whole series. It's a 4-part series, opened and closed by Naomi Seidman, today about matchmaking, marriage, and romantic love. And then the next session will be with Elisa Solomon, who is here with us, who's going to talk about the Fiddler Phenomenon, how based on her book, Miracle of Miracles, which is fantastic. And then Bonnie Weiss, who is also with us here, who is an expert on musical theater, is going to give a presentation about everything that made it so that you can't, once you start thinking of If I Were a Rich Man, you just have to sing all the songs. And a half an hour later, you're like, what have I been doing in the last half hour? So she's going to talk about the lyrics, the music, the book, the choreography. And that's going to be on March 1st. And on March 8th will be the closing lecture, which will take us back to the original Tevye stories by Shalom Aleichem. So you might have some surprises there too. So with that, I'm going to mute myself and give it over to Naomi.
Thank you so much. I don't know if people here understood what, when Racheli said that she's the pro bono director, she and David, I don't know, there's probably other people involved, but I don't exactly know who they are. They've revived the Lair House Judaica, which was such an amazing Berkeley institution. And then before that, an institution in Germany with, Rosenzweig and Buber and all kinds of really important philosophers and teachers, kind of revolution in adult education. And to see this revived after it went under, like so many things did recently, is so inspiring. And Racheli and David are doing it just as a volunteer effort. And it's just a very beautiful thing to see. So thank you to you two for being my friends and for making this happen in Berkeley. And for inviting me and for including me in a program with such distinguished colleagues as Elisa and Bonnie. And thank you all for coming, the people who came. So I'm gonna talk about this move that we think we know, that we think we understand. And I think we understand it because we've seen Fiddler on the Roof. By the way, I was just clearing off my desk and I found the poster for our Fiddler on the Roof, Fiddler at 50 sing-along. We had this amazing event. And Elisa, I think you were there, no? Anyway, and it included a community-wide sing-along at the now deceased California Theater in Berkeley. It included an actual fiddler that walked us around the streets of Berkeley. So Fiddler on the Roof is just such a huge phenomenon, and it's so great that we're going to hear more about it and what made it be what it is, that we kind of think of that as a kind of primary source for what it means to have gone from having your marriage arranged by a matchmaker and your parents to choosing your own partner in life, which we consider so fundamental to modernity, not just Jewish modernity, but all of modernity. And I hope that by the end of the series, you'll see how it's a little bit more of a complicated story than that. And I'll start by giving some historical background. But one thing I'll say is that the Tevye stories themselves come after decades of writing about this issue of arranged marriage, and themselves have a kind of unusual take on what arranged marriage is and what modern romance is. And to really understand what that novelty, the novelty of Shalom Aleicham's moves in the Tevye stories, you have to understand how arranged marriage was seen earlier, and what it meant in terms of Jewish modernization, and in particular, what it meant for the connection that I'm going to focus on, which is the connection between the rise of secular literature and the move from arranged marriage to modern romance. So I'm sorry for those of you who've read my book. I did actually take it off the shelf and look at it today. So I'm going to be repeating myself a little bit, but it's a long book and I'll try to, summarize some of the major points for you. What does it mean to talk about Jews falling in love and with literature at the same time? And how did that happen? And what did it mean for our thinking about what modern love is, what free choice is? So I'm going to share my screen. I hate doing this because then I can't see people very well. But mainly I don't want to see myself. So at least that's an improvement over that. Sorry, here it is. Hopefully you can see that.
Yes, we see it. It's fine.
Okay, I just want to start it from the beginning. Sorry, it's not responding to my, here, let's see if I can advance. Oh, this is what, give me 1 second, I'm sorry. This is what happens with technology. Here we go, okay, thank God. So this is a picture of Pauline Vengerhoff, who I start the book with because she's one of the first people who talked about this move from arranged marriage to modern romance, having very dramatically lived this incredibly abrupt change from one way of organizing marriage to another. So that's one reason she's so important. When she was born in 1833, pretty rich Jewish family, as you can see, she ended up rich too. But she describes how when she was 15 years old, her sister got married in the old way, which is that her parents met with the matchmaker, and the matchmaker introduced them to another matchmaker. One of the things that you might have gotten wrong from Fiddler on the Roof is thinking that it's one matchmaker that contracts a marriage. It's actually two matchmakers, one from each marriage. It's a little bit like buying a house. It's a financial contract. So the matchmakers met, the marriage was arranged. This is the marriage for her older sister, Ava. And Ava, despite pleading with her parents, was not allowed to see the young boy that was chosen for her. Ava, by the way, was all of 2 years older. So Ava was 17 at this marriage. And the marriage came off with the young boy and the young girl having met each other under the canopy or right before at the wedding ceremony. 2 years later, when Pauline was 16 going on 17, herself, everything was totally different. And if you look at the year of her birth, you'll see in 1848, she was 15. That was an era, a revolutionary era in Europe, throughout Europe. And all kinds of liberalization reforms were happening, including in the Russian Empire, which is where Pauline, then known as Pestle, was being raised. But by the time, a year later, after 1848 and 1849, the year she was engaged, everything was totally different. Or maybe I shouldn't say totally different, but as opposed to her parents arranging the marriage, her parents arranged to meet with the family of a prospective groom in a town that was halfway between the two towns. And there, both extended families met and sat in a room, and the negotiations started, the way negotiations started, which is how many years would the young couple be supported by the bride's family. Typically, family trees were brought out in order to compare lineages. The young man was kind of tested by his prospective father-in-law or rabbi or both. All of that was going on in the room. And what Pauline describes in her memoirs, published in 1910, at the very end of her life, is that the young people started to slip away from this room where the boring old people were talking about money and rabbis and lineage, and they went to another room, and this is what happened there. I'll just read it. Everybody's in the way of it, but little by little, the younger people withdrew to the neighboring room. My intended followed also, and finally, my sister Kathy invited me to follow the others. Here, etiquette was set aside. We sat down freely next to one another. I, of course, near my bridegroom. Scarcely had we sat for a moment near one another when the room emptied. Everyone left in order to leave the two of us undisturbed. This behavior irritated me so much that I was unable to utter a word and kept silent, embarrassed. But then my intended began to speak. Trembling from emotion, he spoke to me of his feelings, of love, of loyalty, of undying happiness. Far more than his words, his eyes spoke. So what we have here is something really astonishing. We have a brand new set of social customs, right, that have developed in this particular circle of traditional Jews within the space of no more than 2 years. And what these young people suddenly understand is that in order for a marriage to commence, and apparently the parents are okay with it, the parents allow this to happen, right? They bring the young people together and they tacitly allow it when the young people leave. And not only that, but all the young people among them understand that the proper space for romantic conversation is when the young boy and the young girl are alone together, which is exactly what Jewish law doesn't allow, right? It's called yichud. And not only that, but this young boy is somehow knows to make a speech about love within minutes of meeting this young woman who's quite upset and angry. And I think I'm going to ask you why you think she was angry. I'm going to stop my share for a minute, just because it's so odd to hear my own voice so much. Is that okay, Rachel?
Sure. Let's have some bold theories about why she was angry.
What was so upsetting to Pauline Pessel?
Let me just say that in general, but especially when Naomi speaks, you don't have to be right. You just have to be interesting.
Right, Lord knows I'm not right.
Judy
I
Canofsky,
see
go
Judy's
ahead.
hand.
Well, I think she's terrified. And her friends have just abandoned her to be with this woman, whereas she expected to be at least a little protected with her friends around her with this
Right.
stranger.
Oh my God, that's right. She feels abandoned. I think she feels manipulated was what I came up with. Also, it's one of the things that I say about this in the book, and this is how I start my book, was looking closely at this episode, is that this is a case of a ritual misfire. This is, and I want to point to it being a ritual. So even though she describes it as a kind of loosening of the rules, right? So she says, in this room, all etiquette is set aside. In other words, they're now free. Their parents aren't watching them. The matchmaker isn't watching them. And yet there's a very carefully, collectively choreographed set of, I don't know, rituals is one way to call it. Everybody seems to already know what to do. They know that they're supposed to leave the man and the woman alone. The man knows what he's supposed to say to a woman, and he's supposed to look at her. She hasn't entirely caught up. And the misfire is that she doesn't entirely know what's happening, and she recognizes herself not as being courted, but as being, I think, manipulated. She's a little bit concerned about the oddity of it, right? The fact that this man is looking at her with this young man, he's a year older than her, looking at her with such intensity, and he has a ready-made speech. So where did he get this ready-made speech is one of the questions. So in other words, what you have here is something that poses as a certain kind of freedom. It poses as a certain kind of, let's say, sexual liberation. And yet, right, the rules, it seems like it doesn't follow any of the old rules. And yet there are all kinds of new rules. These rules aren't necessarily expressed, but they're there. And the fact that things are changing so quickly, I think explains partly her confusion, her fear, her fear of being left alone with a man in a very sexually segregated community in which she would have had very few opportunities before this to speak with the man. So thank you for that, Judy. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Frank and Louise did, but they
Well,
got.
I was just gonna say that she didn't know what to do, but it's interesting because it just flashed to me. You know how a lot of modern sex things are getting to be how people are influenced by pornography, and it just like I'm thinking, well, maybe this man is reading, you know, novels or poetry, and somehow it's infiltrated. So there, it's like the beginning of a new kind of ritual, but she's not quite on the page.
It's like I put you there, Louise. I know you, right?
Yep. We way back.
Way back. I know. Nancy. We can't hear you, dear. You got to unmute yourself.
Hi, is Nancy going to talk? Because I have a comment. I'm sorry, Nobi, were waiting for Nancy to respond?
I don't think we can hear her. So Nancy, type what you want to say, and whoever's talking now, please speak.
Okay, it's me, Bonnie. So what struck me was, here is this man, she's never seen him before. Yeah, she's probably heard all kinds of things about, but that he would come forth with so much emotion, it seemed inappropriate. And I think it would bring up feelings of distrust. You know, it's very nice to have somebody pour feelings out, but he really didn't know her. And to come forth with that much feeling, I would say, you don't know me. How dare you talk that way to me? And I would put a wall up if I heard somebody coming at me that way. So.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. So who was it? It was Judy who said, or now I'm already forgetting, but that clearly this man had been reading something and learning about love. And that's one of the points I wanted to make. In other words, this is going on 1848, 1849, all kinds of political, revolutionary developments all over Europe. But in the Jewish world, one of the things that was happening was the spread of the Haskalah, Jewish Enlightenment. And what that spread meant was that people were reading quote unquote alien books, foreign books, she calls them that. And the man, her sister Ava's new husband, was actually one of the ringleaders of these men that were getting together in the town to read philosophy, but also literature and also poetry. And slowly, and these were groups of young men who were expanding their consciousness by reading together. Sorry about my frog in my throat. And slowly, it says, they began to allow women into their circle. And Pauline, who came to know these circles of novel readers, says that these were yeshiva boys who would parse the poetry of Schiller using Talmudic sing-song. So what you have here is a kind of hybrid phenomenon. You have modern European literature done in Jewish ways. So this idea that a book is sacred and has rules and you follow the rules that are in the book, that used to be the Talmud or the Torah. Now it's secular literature. These men are basically taking their habits of thought that they learned in the yeshiva, according to Pauline, this is her analysis, not mine, and transferring them to the realm of literature and learning literature, right? Learning, that's it, right? You learn Torah, you don't learn literature. They're learning literature the way other people, the way in non-Jewish European settings, they read it privately, right? Private individual reading is the typical practice for poetry and prose in European literature. In the beginning, in these maskilic circles, the pattern was you get together and you argue about European literature and you learn from it in Talmudic sing-song. If Schiller says the reason why Schiller compares love to a dove is because, etc. So what you have here is a kind of unique case where the ways in which Jews fell in love with love, as I say in the subtitle of my book, are extremely mediated through European literature. It's European literature that taught them, for instance, how does a young, it says, how is a woman bought in the Tractate of Kiddushin? She's bought in 3 ways. She's bought in this way, she's bought in this way. In the novel, you learn how does a man make a pass at a woman? Well, he has to be alone with her. He has to gaze at her. He has to say, love, Liebe, light, whatever, etc. So what you have here is a phenomenon. Basically, what I wanted to argue in my book, what I want to argue also in this class, is that what looks like a move from a traditional arrangement, and this here I specifically mean marriage, but not only marriage, to a more specifically European, secular, non-Jewish way of doing business, right? So romantic love, Romeo and Juliet, that when Jews take that up, they do it in particularly Jewish ways. So I've just given you, let's say, the thesis statement, my argument for this whole class, and now I want to try to flesh it out. But again, if you have a question or a comment, please don't be shy. So one very obvious way in which you can talk about how they did things in Jewish ways. Yes, Jews basically fell in love with love, not because they looked at, you know, people always looked at each other and fell in love with each other, right? You didn't need a book for that. But to do it in organized cultural ways, that was borrowed from European models. But the way it was borrowed was particularly Jewish. So let me take some time and go back to my slideshow and flesh that out a bit. So let's go to my next slide. This would be helpful if, sorry, I think it, okay. Here we go. So I should just say that my basic method is borrowed from a book that was written in 1957, which is slightly embarrassing, but it's a great book and I'm a huge fan of it. It's by someone named Ian Watt, and it's called The Rise of the Novel. And it basically explains the role that the novel played in what could be called the sexual modernization of life in 18th century England. He's a scholar of the English novel, the 18th century English novel. And his basic argument is, here I'll read from it. The most universal religion of the West is the sex religion. Love between the sexes is to be regarded as the supreme value of life on earth. The novel supplies it with its doctrine and its rituals, just as the medieval romance had done for courtly love. So basically what he's saying is what I've already said to some extent, which is that the ways in which society after society, now we're mostly talking about Jewish societies, but this same pattern played itself out. First of all, within the Jewish society isn't just one thing, right? It plays itself out over and over again with the waves of secularization. But again, it's not just Jews who are modernizing in this way. It's every traditional culture, right? You can go on YouTube and watch a show about arranged marriage in India, or arranged marriage seems to be the way in which traditional societies, or many traditional societies, I don't want to be caught with the exceptions, but many traditional societies work out. And I'll explain a little bit of why this should be the case, why it should be the case that parents decide who their children marry. But in any case, it's an incredibly common feature of many traditional societies. And traditional societies very often go through a particular set of transformations, which Jews certainly did, which is transforming from accepting the logic and the need for parents arranging marriage to the absolute wonderfulness of young people choosing their own mates. And the wonderfulness is quite clear and obvious, right? And Ian Watt says that this wonderfulness of being able to choose your own mate, this kind of moment of, let's say, in its kind of primary heteronormative archetypal European mode, it's boy meets girl at the age of 14, 15, 16. And then, you know, the novel ends and they get married, and then it's all a little bit less exciting, unless you're, you know, lucky, like David and Rachel are. And that moment of sort of our sexual prime and our desires has a kind of absolute value in the West that he considers to be the thing that replaced religion. And it itself is a religion. That's why he calls it a sex religion. So, and what we get instead of heaven, or instead of the afterlife, or instead of spiritual bliss, is the kind of bliss that is available to young people in their sexual prime. Yeah, Racheli, am I already talking for 45 minutes?
Chas v'chalila. No, actually, I had a question and I realized that I'm a participant too. My question is, why do you think he called it the sex religion rather than the love religion?
So this is, thank you for that. I was trying to figure out whether I wanted to talk about that. Maybe it was a digression, but I did want to talk about it. So thank you for the permission. So one of the ways, so Ian Watt's arguments have held up very, very well, except on exactly the point that Racheli just talked about, which is that people now draw a finer distinction between two revolutions. One could be called the love religion, or the sentimental, it's sometimes called the sentimental revolution. And the second one is the sexual revolution. And the sexual revolution, so the difference is the kind of Victorian, veiled, sentimental way of talking about love, a soulmate, the one true love, that whole discourse, followed by what could be called the sexual revolution, which you could say, you know, a prime moment is Portnoy's complaint. Jews, by the way, are very strongly associated with the sexual revolution. And it's not a coincidence, for reasons that I hope will be clear by the end of this class. But there are earlier manifestations of it. So in early 20th century, you know, Lulu by Alban Berg, Wedekin's Lulu, I just happened to watch a few minutes of it on TV. This a kind of anti-sentimental view of the relationship between the sexes, even a dark view of the femme fatale. But in any case, we now understand that we need to draw the kind of finer distinctions than Ian Watt did. And why did he call it the sex religion? Because he was, I think, I mean, this is me, he was under the sway, he's writing in the 50s when psychoanalysis and Freud was at its height.
Right.
He himself was trying to strip the sex religion of what he saw as its obfuscating sentimentality, even while connecting it to religion, which of course is the source of a lot of its obfuscating sentimentality. So hopefully that made sense. But I think that partly explains Watt's choice of language. And Rachel's not the only person to wonder at it. And by the way, that is a very good looking literary critic, if I may say so, to write about this. So how does he understand this revolution? Where did it come from? And why should it be connected to religion? And along with being very interested in Freud, he was also very interested in Marx. Those two went together often. And he basically saw it as, he saw the sex religion as emerging as a kind of, again, obfuscating and sentimental false cover over certain kinds of economic transformations that were happening in 18th century society, including urbanization, the rise of a mercantile class. Suddenly you have a lot of people living in cities as opposed to on family farms or in kind of households. Households are one important reason that families are arranged in order to get plots of land that go together, to enlarge them, considerations like that. Suddenly what you have are individuals living in a city. And in a city, there are also much stricter divisions of labor. And along with these stricter divisions of labor, who goes to work, who does what, who's a servant, what kind of servant, one of the ways in which the novel serves this economic order without naming it. It calls it love, but it's all about economics. And it produces the gender ideologies that tell you that women, middle-class women, should be in the home. And it reinforces the notion of male political economic activity. It also solves a certain kind of problem, which is what do women do if servants are taking care of things? And it provides, and the novel is directed toward mostly women. He's interested in the novel. And it tells them certain satisfying things that are not quite the way things are. In other words, in this period, in the 18th century, it suddenly becomes really critical for women to find a mate in order to survive in the city. Middle-class women, we're talking about the middle class to begin with. And the novel tells them that men will chase them. In other words, women are, despite the fact that they are, some of them, desperate to settle themselves into a marriage to survive, beginning in the 18th century, the novel basically flatters them with the story that it's men who really want them. So in the novel, the man will chase the woman, even though in real life, she will have to strategize to figure out how to survive through a man. So these are some of the ways that the novel doesn't entirely tell the story, and it specifically doesn't tell the economic story, right? So the woman has to say no, 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 over and over again to the man, and the man has to say please, 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 and the man will never say, you know, and if you come live in my house, you can stop working behind the counter of a store and you can live a nice middle-class life. Those words may never be uttered in a novel. The words that are uttered in a novel are, your beautiful eyes make me swoon. So your beautiful eyes make me swoon covers over certain kinds of new economic truths. But where does all this come from, aside from the immediate economic conditions? It has yet another set of factors that lead to that help create the novel. And the other one is the whole history of the Western Christian romance, which moves from, according to Watt, it moves from the worship of the Virgin Mary, which gets secularized in the Middle Ages, into the chivalric romance, where you have not just one Virgin Mary who died a long time ago, but you have, I think I had a picture, or did I not? Ooh, I don't know what happened to that picture. But you have, instead of having one Virgin Mary, you have the lady that is virginal in the sense that she's married and the knight can never get her.
Oh my God.
And what happens in the 18th century when you get suddenly a decent sized middle class is that all those things that used to be the privilege only of the very few enormously rich elite class of the nobility and the knights and the ladies, suddenly every woman gets to be a hard to get, hard to attain woman who's supposed to keep her chastity against all the men who want it. And every woman gets to be kind of, through a democratization, every woman gets to be the Virgin Mary. All those emotions that were directed in Catholicism toward Mary and then were directed toward the unattainable lady now get transformed into a kind of, every woman somehow has to play that virginal role. Every woman of the middle class and above, which is why you also need the servant class, where those people can be more open. And the novel is very useful for this, because this is a period in which it's actually really difficult to find a mate because of these new urban conditions. And the novel both describes the difficulties, as opposed to a love poem in which it's right there on the page. The novel always has these plot complications that tell you why it's taking so goddamn long to find the person that you need to find. And this is a period in which, you know, women are reading these novels, and the novels are both delaying, showing them the truth that in order to get the man that they want, they need to delay gratifying him, and also delaying the gratification for these women. And as we all know, delaying gratification is one way of maximizing desire. So novels are kind of perfect machines for teaching people the rules for catching a mate, and themselves producing the kind of desire that can then sort of work as a machine in which you insert the woman you just met into this desire that's been already stimulated by the novel. So it teaches roles, it teaches rules, it teaches delayed gratification, and it teaches that if you follow all these rules in the last chapter, you will get married and happily ever after. So that's what the novel is for Ian Watts. And one of the things that he says is that the novel also, aside from the aspects of boy meets girl and the various roles that each one has to play according to the rules of the new sex religion, which include not mentioning money if you're middle class, is also the larger society. So one of the things that the novel teaches you is that it's all about the couple. In modern marriage, the couple immediately sets up as a new family, wholly apart from their own family, their own parents, often far away from them. Extended kinship ties lose their force. Sorry, I can't see everything, so I'm making up some of the words. And the conjugal family typically becomes an autonomous unit. So we're talking about, this is called nuclearization, according to the sociologist, the reduction of the extended family to the important thing, which is first the couple, and then the couple and their children. This is something else that the novel teaches you. Maybe just looking ahead to Tevye, Tevye is not, despite its appearances, a set of short stories that teaches the significance and importance of modern romance. The Tevye stories actually, I think, describe the price that's paid for modern romance. So the price that's paid for the destruction of the extended family. One of the things that's so unusual about the story of modern romance as told in the Tevye stories is that by this, it may be the first time in Western, I don't know, that's too big a claim, but it's highly unusual for the story of modern romance to be told from the perspective of the old father, right? Could you imagine Romeo and Juliet? The story is typically told from the perspective of the young couple. That's who we want to identify with. That's who we want to fall in love with them. We want to be at the peak of our biological erotic powers like they are. Who cares what the father thinks? The father's role in the love story is generally to be one of the obstacles that delays gratification. So in Romeo and Juliet, the fathers hate each other. Beautiful. That means that since if you're going to have a play with 5 acts, you can't have them fall into bed in Act 2. You can after the sex revolution, but we're talking about delaying the moment when they fall into bed permanently. In the case of Romeo and Juliet, the fathers have to come into the story and make sure that that young boy and young girl don't do what they both want to do, and which they naturally would be doing if not for parents. So what Tevye tells us is that there's a story that can be told from the perspective of the father. And that story is that to move from the left, the photograph on the left, to the photograph on the right is not entirely a fabulous story. It's not entirely a fabulous story for what it means for the destruction of extended family and the destruction of community. Okay, I'm going to move on. Oh my God, I think I should just race. Where's Racheli?
Yeah, we are
Can I
at,
just race through my slides really quickly and make my
45
argument, then we'll have a
minutes.
conversation?
it's at 45 minutes to race, but not so fast that people can't follow you.
Okay, so 1853, just a few years after Pauline Vengerov writes her memoirs, you get the first Hebrew novel. I mean, people have arguments about whether it's entirely the first, but for our purposes, we'll call it the first. As it happened, Pauline Vengerov and Avram Mapu were friends, they're family friends. Mapu was actually her children's tutor. It's a very small world, the world of Jewish letters. Mapu wrote a novel called The Love of Zion, and The Love of Zion takes place in the time of Isaiah. And it's a love story between a young boy and a young girl named Amnon and Tamar, who in this case are not actually brother and sister as they are in the Bible, so their love is not incestuous. Though, excellent question, why Avram Mapu took those names. But in any case, this is a story of a young boy and a young girl who meet in the fields. And what they don't, and he's a shepherd and she's a princess, a Judean princess. And they fall in love with each other, but obviously the match cannot be because he's a poor shepherd and she's a rich princess. We've all heard this story before. Now, I've said that the way Jews tell these stories are often a little different. And what you have is one of the first examples of what could be called a double plot. So you have one plot, which is boy meets girl and the parents stand in the way. And then you have this other secret plot, which is that the parents are not actually the real parents. And the real parents who disappear, a complicated plot, I won't bore you with it. The real parents promised this boy and this girl to each other. So this is an example of a love story, which is both a modern romance, right? What could be more modern than class differences aren't important when, you know, you're 16 and the guy's gorgeous. So that's one story, that's the modern story. And yet, it turns out that this boy and this girl, despite the fact that their parents really supposedly don't want them to marry each other, were actually promised to each other by their parents, by their true parents, as opposed to these evil usurpers. So you have this really odd phenomenon, which keeps happening in Jewish literature, which is that things that look like arranged marriage, things that look like modern romances, are actually arranged marriages. And not, spoiler alert, the same is true for the Tevye stories, at least a few of them. I'll just say about the reception of Mapu's book. Amazing reception in ways that you can imagine, right? This is a culture in which the reading of a book means you can now dramatically change your life. And we've already seen it with Pauline Vengerov. It happens to person after person after person. Shalom Aleichem reads this book. He spends all Shabbos lying on his belly reading it. He has the worst headache, Matzah Shabbos, but he puts it down and he decides he's going to be a writer. Another writer describes how he read this book by Mapu, and he was already engaged to the daughter of the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of his yeshiva. If you know, that's the big prize. my brother's married to the daughter of the head of his yeshiva. The best, smartest boy gets, and he's been feeling really great about this. He hit the ball out of the park, and suddenly he realizes the Rosh Yeshiva is a very good-looking man. His daughter, unfortunately, isn't. And suddenly he thinks, why can't I be with someone like Tamar, who's as tall as a palm tree and has perfect white teeth, instead of this poor shtetl girl who nobody would ever compare to Tamar. The philosopher Lilienblum in the middle, he's already married by the time this novel crosses his path. He picks it up and starts reading it with another woman, not his wife. And next thing you know, he's run away from home and left his wife to go find an education. So this novel had dramatic effects in the lives of traditional, typically men. In this way, another difference, this was a novel that women could read mostly, since they didn't know Hebrew, they could read in Yiddish translation. So let me talk about a little bit more about, just before I get into what are the major differences between the way Jews made this transition and other people. We talk about what arranged marriage is, because I think that this is often misunderstood. The way in which it's typically understood is that a matchmaker makes a match between two families. And so, first of all, it's two matchmakers. I've already told you that. Second of all, most traditional Jews did not have matchmakers. Matchmaking was only if there was any kind of exchange of wealth or property or anything like that. And in that case, you would have things like lineage. And most traditional Jews in Eastern Europe had neither lineage nor wealth nor etc., nor had any interest in creating wealth that way, any possibility. They couldn't be in the game, which is why Tevye would never have gone to a matchmaker. But in any case, what happened in these arranged marriages? Well, lineage is a big part of it. I have here a family tree. By the way, one of the things that is really interesting about family trees is that it can start with an individual. I think this is a bit of a digression. Maybe I shouldn't do it, but I'm really interested in family trees. So this is person A, who has 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 16 great-grandparents, etc. And you get a map like that. Now all of this would make millions and millions and millions of ancestors, and we know that's not the case. Actually, a family tree, you can imagine it beginning with Adam and Eve and then moving out this way. So family trees collapse on themselves. In other words, you don't have, I just read this in a book, 1,000 ancestors. Your great-great-grandmother on your father's side is the same person as your great-great-grandmother on your mother's side. Typically, what you have here are interwoven. This is sometimes described by people who do family trees as a broken umbrella. So it looks like this and then like that. It comes together in both ways. Or a diamond. So what is it about? So obviously, how is Jewish lineage counted, and how does it work? Maybe I should go back to that. This would be more important in the family tree of a young woman than it would in a young man. So a young man has certain assets, including his ability to learn Torah, his smarts, whereas a girl has lineage and wealth, typically. So lineage and wealth buys Torah scholarship. Torah scholarship is a form of conspicuous consumption. You get a smart son-in-law who sits in the study hall and impresses your friends with his smarts, and he lives with you. That's why he lives with the bride. So this is a kind of unusual thing that traditional marriage are generally, I forget the term, matrilocal. They generally are supported by the bride's family, and the lineage part is more important for the bride than it is for the groom, because a groom has Torah study and brains to sell, whereas a bride typically has the wealth of her family and lineage of her family. Now, Jacob Katz, who's the big, let's see, I'll go back to this for a second. Jacob Katz is who described the system. What he says about traditional marriage versus traditional arranged marriage versus modern romance is that they both have an explicit versus an implicit ideology. I think I have this here. I think that this can explain it. This slide can explain it. So, and I'll leave out the whole in-laws thing for the moment. I don't know if we have time. But what you see here is on the left, this is a postcard in the Magnus collection, actually, examining the groom. This is what this is the bride's father and the bride's teacher and the groom's teacher giving the groom a lesson to see how smart he is. But when I say it also shows implicit ideology, you see the women at the doorway. And what are the women thinking? The women aren't thinking, does he know his Talmud? They're thinking, is he cute? Basically, is he cute? You could see that from their faces. So sexual attraction plays a part in traditional marriage, but it's an unstated part. In other words, if the groom has impressed the bride's father will go to the bride and say, he seems like a very smart guy. And the bride will say, oh, great. I really, she'll be motivated. So she'll get a peek and she'll be motivated. And while the talk is all about money and Torah and lineage, underneath that talk, very often sexual attraction will have its way in one way or another. That's exactly the opposite of how it works in modern romance, according to Jacob Katz, sorry. So according to Jacob Katz, now the official explicit ideology of modern romance is that you get married to someone because you love them, and at the very least, because you find them sexually appealing. In the picture on the right, I forget who that is. I can't even remember where I found that picture, but something tells me that very likely the man is sexually attracted to the young woman next to him, but the young woman next to him is in it for the money. But to say I'm in it for the money is not allowed in modern romance. So what gets pushed, what gets suppressed, what is unspoken in modern romance is things like, he has a good job. Okay, he's not that appealing, but he has a good job. In other words, the practical aspect of modern romance is unspeakable according to the sex religion. In other words, to say, I want to marry somebody because I'm looking for a place where I could just get off my feet and have a comfortable life is unacceptable. No one would buy your novel. But economics functions beneath the surface, just beneath the surface of modern romance. In the same way that the matchmakers can talk openly about money, but can't talk openly about beauty. And also it's interesting that the beauty in modern romance is supposed to belong to the woman, whereas the beauty in traditional arranged Jewish marriage belongs at least as much to the man as to the woman. In other words, all these Yiddish love songs, the beautiful boy is the women sing about the beautiful men. So the whole question of how the genders are organized, which have such significant and deep economic roots, that's all organized differently. Maybe I'll say something really quickly about Jewish kinship. So I'm talking a little bit about what's different about Jewish ways of organizing love and organizing community. Community is extremely important. Obviously community is extremely important for all traditional societies, but for traditional nomadic societies or mobile societies, they're particularly important. So among the societies that have the strictest rules of arranging marriage are those where Aboriginal societies in Australia, where if you need to know that if you move to a water hole, that you can have access to this water hole because your daughter has married a son of the group of people who have control over that water hole. Arranged marriage will, the parents and the people who are involved in the survival of the community, their choices will trump that of the young couple. An argument can be made that Jewish society has similar needs as a non-land-based society in which having connections all around the world can be a matter of survival. Arranging marriages, when you have any kind of wealth or any kind of power, it becomes too important a chip to just give away to the young people. Evidence for this is the anthropological work of Beatrice Bina Silverman Weinreich, Uriel Weinreich's widow, who basically did an analysis of Jewish kinship terms. And what she noticed is that there are some kinship terms that are taken from German or from Slavic. So in other words, we share the same kinds of ideas of kinship that these other groups that we live among have. And then there are additional kinship terms that only Jews have, right? They're derived from Hebrew, that's the sign. And one of the strongest Jewish kinship terms that had no German cognate and no Slavic cognate and has no English cognate is the term machatanim. So these are relations. So does everybody here know what machatanim are, machatanista? Machatanim are so my husband's parents are my father-in-law and my mother-in-law, just as my parents are his mother-in-law and his father-in-law. But my parents and my husband's parents have a kinship relationship that's expressed in Yiddish called, they're machatanim with each other. In other words, my in-laws and his in-laws have a relationship with each other that's expressed in Yiddish, that has no, you can't say it in English. There's no pure kinship term. This particular kinship term is evidence of the, sorry, I'm giving you things to look at that I'm not, maybe I'll just stop the share and I'll try to wrap up what I was going to say. So a couple of things. So one piece of evidence of a kind of a different Jewish way of thinking about kinship is the existence of these Hebrew-derived Yiddish kinship terms, including machatanim, the two in-laws that are married to each other, as it were, through the marriage of their children. So marriage creates kinship not only forward to children, but also backward to parents. Why is this important? This is one of the things that gets lost when you give the children the right to create the marriage. In other words, marriages created by parents are also creating kinship relationships that are meaningful because they're chosen. If your child marries, the biggest threat to this type of kinship is intermarriage. But so is any kind of marriage in which the parents don't play a part. This might be the importance of these relationships, which are ignored in traditional marriage, in modern romance, might be one of the reasons why when Jews start writing about the move to modern romance, they somehow manage to bring back these old ways of doing business. My argument is, and I guess this is a Freudian argument too, that the literature of Jewish romance tends to bring in the return of the repressed. Another example is the Dibbuk, in which similarly there's a mismatch in which the mismatched young boy and young girl also, as if we can't live without this double plot, also their parents promised them to each other and then forgot. One of the parents died and the other one forgot. And somehow these young people express both the erotic love that young people have for each other, attraction, love, and they express mystically this Jewish kinship fantasy, which is this idea that somehow, even though they are choosing their own mate, they're also expressing the deep desire for marriage to connect back to the ancestors. So the deep desire to have it both ways, to have a marriage that connects families with each other in a deep way, in which the parents are involved, and that somehow that's not the opposite of sexual attraction, the way it is in Romeo and Juliet, but it's somehow the same thing, which gets us back to the Talmudic idea of what love is, right? God, the original matchmaker is God. When you're in love with someone, it's because it was fated. Fated love is the most powerful mystical love. Fated love is also arranged love. And arranged love is thus reclaimed as a kind of secret message at the very heart of the modern romance in Jewish literature. That's part of my argument. And I showed you a little piece of Angels in America, which who would think of that as being about that double plot? What could be further from the arranged marriage, which is also sexual attraction, than Angels in America, which is a gay love story between a Jewish man and a non-Jewish man. And yet in that story too, there's the return of, maybe I'll show you that image again. If you remember Angels in America, the priors, this idea that true love will bring in our ancestors, that true love without that dimension of community and family and parents is not true love. Here, I'll show you that last image here. Those are the priors, visiting Prior who's dying of AIDS in his bed to tell him whatever you're going through, we went through too. And here you have the Dibbuk, where she is expressing her own attraction to Hanan and repeating the love that Hanan's father had for her father and her father had for Hanan's father. So I guess just to wrap up, I would say that a couple of reasons why Jews did things differently, including, one major reason is that the sex religion didn't reach as deep into Jewish society as it did into Christian society, since if you believe Ian Watt, the sex religion in its purest form builds on Christian views about women and virginity that are completely foreign to Jewish culture. right? Nobody's supposed to be a virgin, not men, not women. And it built on this kind of chivalry that Jews had no access to, right? I mean, chivalry, there were two sides of that knight's spear, and Jews were better acquainted with the other side of it. So this notion, so the gender complementarity, the active, powerful man, and the weak and passive woman, those things were foreign to Jewish culture. But I think maybe the biggest thing was that the rule that in the sex religion, the feelings and rights and choices of the young couple as autonomous agents absolutely trump the family and trump the community, that those things were painful for Jews because of the importance of family and community to Jews. And thus Jews produced not pale imitations of European literary depictions of modern love, but actually a new hybrid form. And I hope this also begins to explain why it is that when the sentimental revolution gave way to the sexual revolution, it did so with the help of Jews. Jews had also had given the kind of ways in which Jewish law had treated sexual matters as if it's basically positions and how often you're supposed to do it and the body and all that. That kind of matter of factness, despite the fact that it was yoked to religious rules, could come back as a kind of de-sublimated, de-sentimentalized view of the body and its functions. Okay, so I know I threw a whole lot at you. I see Rena's hand up.
Yeah, Rena will go first. Then we have a question in the chat, which I'll read. When did the term and the idea of bashert come into Jewish lexicon? But Rena, you go first.
I just wanted to point out that even among Jews who have no connection to the idea of matchmaking or arranged matches, that the term machatanim is so persistently used that and felt that, in my extended family, where there's for generations no tradition of arranged marriages, people still call that relationship the machatanim.
Right.
I think that it's a desire to reconnect with that sense of the picture of extended family.
Right. I think one way to look at it is that basically what post-traditional societies, let's say Jewish among others, have is hybrid formations, not the pure Romeo and Juliet individual choice, but some way of bringing together traditional ways of thinking about what marriage is with modern romance. Because I think we long for it. I think we long for those, the boy meets girl, wonderful excitement of, that those early moments. That's great. That's the lollipop that makes you modern. But what happens afterwards? I mean, the isolation of, the fact that the price paid for that particular move is the devastation of the extended family, is something that makes people want to find hybrid forms of these conditions or these circumstances. And that might be one hybrid form, the persistence of the term machatanim. Yeah. Did somebody else?
Yeah, let me read that question again from the chat about the term bashert. When does that end?
Where does bashert come from?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a modern term. It's a lot of the material. It's a folk belief, the way it you know, I'm sure it's not just in Ashkenazi culture, but I'm familiar with it from Ashkenazi culture. And it's an interesting folk belief because on the one hand, it seems like, does it mean that if you fall in love with someone, God decided that's who you're going to fall in love with? And did God also decide you're going to fall out of love with them? And, you know, what exactly it means? Is it a form of arranged marriage or is it a form of, it's really interestingly double as a belief, but parts of it go back to the Talmud. I mean, this idea that what is God doing so God created the world. It almost sounds like a joke. God created the world in 6 days, and it's been a while since then, thousands of years, right? So what has God been doing since then? God's been arranging marriages. 40 days before someone's born, God says, so-and-so will marry so-and-so. And there's also, you know, many similar types of material like that in the Talmud, all of it really interesting. And it, as a folk belief, it becomes a kind of, it's an interesting folk belief because it speaks to our feeling. So love, it's excessive. Right. It's almost defined by its excess, right? What is this person and why is my heart beating so fast? That kind of thing. It feels like it's more than just me, or it feels like it's more than just reason. So the understanding of it as coming from God, right? Basher, or fate. I think it speaks to the way it's not completely within our control, right? It's, you know, why am I feeling this way, right? It's not how I normally feel when I talk to somebody. So that could be part of a psychological reading of it. And if I can say one more thing, Rachel, just about, so Lillian Bloom, the guy who read that, oh, I see there's a bunch of questions. Let's hear the questions, because if you get me started, let's hear the questions, and then I'll try to make the answer short at the end.
I'm gonna call on David, and then Nancy, you'll be next. Hopefully you fixed your speaker, but David will go first.
Yeah, so the interesting thing
Right,
is
for sure.
this interaction between Jews and the surrounding Christian culture. If you go back to the 13th century, the Sefer Hasidim, this book that comes out of this pietistic sect in the Rhineland, it's full of the word ahava, love, and and poses all kinds of questions like, if your parents make you marry somebody you don't love, should you do it or should you not do it? Goes around in circles. And then in another place, it condemns those who read romances. And what you can see there is that these values have infiltrated this very pietistic sect, but they're also aware that this is not really, is this Jewish or isn't it Jewish? It's kind of problematized there.
Right. Yeah. I have a million things to say, but I'm going to hold back till the end, till we hear all the questions.
Go ahead, Nancy.
You can hear me this time?
Yes.
Okay, good. Do we know anything about the percentage of marriages that stayed together from arranged marriages, that they didn't break the Jewish contract, versus those who are Jewish now, married by a rabbi and signed the Jewish contract? Do we know anything about that?
There's a book, there's someone who knows it. I'm not good at that kind of thing, but it's actually, I'm trying to remember. David, where's David? Has he read, Shay Rand Fries's book, Marriage and Divorce in Imperial Russia? There's a scholar at Brandeis who, I swear, she's read every marriage contract and every, she has some very interesting statistics that marriage actually, which you would think that the question of which is better and which is worse, right? do you have a leg up if you choose your own mate? It's kind of interesting that's even a question. But there's something so, this just occurred to me actually, that it's interesting, which is more successful, the arranged marriage or the modern romance? So Pauline Vengerov says her sister Ava had a better marriage than she did, and hers was chosen supposedly. And why that is, and when does where are the divorce rates higher? Divorce rates actually, I think, you know what, I have to get back to you next time. I'm trying to, it's counterintuitive, but now I'm forgetting what the response, what Shayran Fries's argument is in her book about marriage and divorce. But
Okay, thank you.
sorry, I know that was a little bit of a confusing question. This thing about Sefer Hasidim, Ahava, there's also the word Ahava, the word love, and what does it mean? And how does the religious term fit in with the, let's say, sexual term, the romantic term? This has a lot of, I mean, it's very interesting to think about it from the perspective of Christianity and Judaism, because Christianity sees itself as the religion of love. So what does it mean? But Jews wanted to get in the business too. I mean, this is something that you actually, I think, have to explain to Christians, that there was a student at the GTU who wrote a dissertation about how every Rashi at the beginning of a book of the Pentateuch, and Rashi's living, around that, in those same centuries as Sefer Hasidim, everyone starts with, contains the phrase, Mitochi bato Yisrael, out of God's love for Israel. So Jews were in the business of arguing that God loved the Jews more than against what the Christians were arguing. So there's a Jewish-Christian polemic going on that level. There's also a Jewish-Christian polemic going on the level of romantic love. For instance, Lillian Bloom, who went wild about, who's one of the people who read Mapu with his girlfriend, his adulterous girlfriend, he later wrote a kind of polemic against Jewish novels. He said that Jews are writing novels, they're just assimilating. Jews know that the word love has many different meanings. It means the love that parents have for children and that children have for parents, which are different kinds of love, and the love that the romantic love and the sexual love. He says the idea that literature only should be written about the love that young people have for each other, sexual and romantic love, that's something that the Christians have taught us. Jews understand all the flavors of love. And it's interesting because Tevye the Dairyman is about romantic love, but it's even more so about what's the flavor of the love that a father has for his daughter at exactly the moment that she's looking to replace him with some new guy. What's the flavor of that love? He says Jews understand love between parents and children in ways that Christians can't comprehend because of their obsession with the love between, the love for the adored woman who's really the Virgin Mary, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, that gets us to 2 minutes to closing. Any last questions?
Last quick question, or? Okay.
So, maybe if you'll give me the last minute, or you want to say,
Yes.
so I'll just say that my feeling is that because Jews come at this sex religion slant, let's say, sideways, not in the usual way, not in the way that the English readers that Ian Watt was talking about, because they have a different prehistory, and because they have different economic conditions and different ways of organizing gender, they end up producing new varieties of romantic stories, and let's call them sexual stories. And as I said early in the class, Erica Jong, Philip Roth, these people who are considered to be kind of heretics of the sex religion, who say things that no one else will say about sex and love. The fact that those people were Jewish is not a coincidence. And even if Jews began by imitating Christian models of love, the world has changed enough that the most famous story about this move from arranged marriage to modern romance, I think without doubt, is Fiddler on the Roof, and which is to say that the entire world now has begun to see this question a little bit more Jewishly.
Wow, amazing ending. Let me just say that I neglected the beginning to thank Claes California, represented here by Judith Konofsky, who is partnering with us on this program, and also to mention that the East Bay International Jewish Film Festival is partnering with us, and they're screening yet another movie about the making of Fiddler on the Roof. Not Miracle of Miracles, which some of
I
you may
think it's
have
Wonder of Wonders, isn't
seen.
it? Wonder
Yeah,
of
excuse
Wonders?
me, Wonder of Wonders. I always mix them up. It's Wonder of Wonders. It's a wonderful documentary. If you, and Elisa Solomon was a consultant on it. If you haven't seen it, watch it in the next week. It'll give you a lot of insight and things that you're going to want to talk about. But there's yet another movie about the move of Fiddler on the Roof from the Broadway stage to film, and that's being shown as part of the East Bay International Jewish Film Festival, and it's listed on our website. On the program page, you can see a link for it. So with that, we'll bid you Laila Tov, a gute Nacht, and see you. Wonder of One. Oh,
No,
okay.
there it is.
That's why. Okay, thank you, Elisa. I'm actually, Wonder of Wonders is her book. You got to read the book, but I don't know if you'll be able to read it by next week, but start. And the film is called Miracle of Miracles. So I don't know if you had to negotiate who's going to take which term, but they're both wonderful, and hopefully you will take a look at both of them before the next session. So good night, and see you on the 15th. Bye-bye.
Is this class every